Every single day you make thousands of judgments about other people. But what if I told you your brain is basically running on autopilot? That it's filled with all these hidden shortcuts and biases that totally shape how you see the world? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on your own mind and reveal the invisible programming that dictates how you judge pretty much everyone you meet.
All right, first up, let's talk about one of the most powerful and, honestly, kind of dangerous things your brain does: judging a book by its cover. We all do it, right? In the blink of an eye. But the real question is, how accurate are we, really? You'd probably think it's no better than a coin toss, right? A total guess. But what if I told you that, in some cases, that very first glance can be, well, shockingly predictive? The research here is pretty mind-blowing. Okay, get this. In one study, people were shown photos of political candidates for just 1 second. A single second. Based on that glance alone, their ratings of who looked more competent actually predicted the real winner in 69% of the election races. I mean, that is way, way better than chance. And it's not a fluke. Another study had people watch just 30 seconds of silent video of a professor teaching. It's incredible, but their ratings of that professor's effectiveness almost perfectly matched the ratings from students who had taken their class for an entire semester. Our brains can find the signal in the noise with almost terrifying speed. So, if our first glance can be so accurate, it brings up a huge question. Why are we also so often so profoundly wrong about people? And this is where the story gets really interesting. Okay, so whenever we see someone do something, our brain immediately turns into a detective, trying to figure out the why. And this is where we uncover our first major culprit for misjudgment. Just think about it. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Is it because they're a selfish, terrible person? That's blaming their disposition. Or is it because they're maybe rushing to the hospital? That's blaming the situation. See? We make these kinds of judgments all day long, and our process, well, it's anything but fair. So it turns out our brains have a default setting, and it's called the fundamental attribution error. It's a really powerful one. We are basically hardwired to blame a person's character while completely ignoring the power of their situation. This classic experiment just shows the bias perfectly. People were randomly assigned roles, either questioner or contestant. The questioners got to write their own tough questions. A massive advantage, right? And as you can see on the graph, even though the observers knew the game was rigged, they still rated the questioners as being smarter. They just couldn't see past the performance and factor in the situation. And this leads to this fascinating double standard called the actor-observer difference. When we're the actor, we see all the situational pressures. I was late because the traffic was just insane. But when we're observing someone else do the exact same thing, we blame their personality. Oh, they were late because they're just lazy. Same action, two completely different explanations. Let's be honest, our brains are fundamentally lazy, and not in a bad way. They just evolved to be incredibly efficient. So to deal with the overwhelming amount of social information we face every day, they created mental shortcuts. And our next culprit for misjudgment has a name: heuristics. Think of heuristics as your brain's rules of thumb. They give you a pretty good answer, like right now, using the least amount of effort possible. The problem is they trade accuracy for speed, and, well, sometimes that trade-off gets us into some serious trouble. Let's try one out right now. Which state has more tornadoes, Kansas or Nebraska? Now don't look it up, just go with your gut. What's the very first thing that pops into your head? If you said Kansas, you're like most people, and you've just fallen for something called the availability heuristic. The correct answer, by the way, is that they have roughly the same number of tornadoes. But for most of us, Kansas immediately brings to mind the Wizard of Oz. And that vivid, easily available image makes it feel more correct, completely overwriting the actual data. Another really powerful mental shortcut is the representativeness heuristic. This is basically your brain playing a quick matching game. Does this person match my mental prototype of a librarian, or a construction worker, or a tech CEO? It's a super fast way to categorize people, but it's also the cognitive engine that drives stereotyping. So far we've talked about how we interpret information, but it actually gets deeper than that. Our biases act like a bouncer at the club of our mind. They decide what information even gets in. We don't just see the world, we see the world we expect to see. This is one of the most powerful biases we have, for sure. We don't look for the truth, we look for confirmation that we were already right.
It's why we tend to follow people online who agree with us and just instantly dismiss information that challenges our worldview. We're all basically detectives looking only for clues that prove our own case. So, what's the mechanism that does all this filtering? It's something called schemas. And the easiest way to think of them is like mental filing cabinets. You've got a folder for libraries, a folder for first dates, a folder for job interviews. And these folders tell you what to expect and what to pay attention to, which helps you navigate the world efficiently. This brings us to the famous invisible gorilla experiment. People were told to focus on counting how many times a basketball was passed. Their counting schema became so powerful that half of them, completely failed to see a person in a full gorilla suit walk into the middle of the screen, beat their chest, and then walk off. They were blind to a gorilla because they were too busy looking for basketballs. That's the power of a schema. And this slide just shows how easily our schemas can be triggered or primed. On the left, if you're primed with colors, your brain automatically completes the word as green. But on the right, primed with fruits, it becomes grape. The information is identical, but your interpretation is completely different, all because of a tiny little cue you probably didn't even notice. Okay, so we've identified the culprits, our default setting to blame the person, our brain's lazy shortcuts, and its powerful desire to always be right. Now for the most important part. What can we do about it? How do we fight back? So here's the most important thing to get. Your brain isn't broken. These biases aren't bugs, they're features. Seriously, they're the product of thousands of years of evolution designed to help you make sense of a really complex world with incredible speed. They're a survival tool. The trick is, you can't just turn these features off. But, and this is a big but, you can become aware of them. And that awareness, that's a superpower. It's the ability to recognize when your brain is just on autopilot and consciously decide to take the controls yourself, to question that first impression, to challenge that gut reaction. So think about one judgment you made just today. That driver who cut you off, the cashier who seemed a little rude, the colleague who sent that blunt email. Your brain wrote a story about them in an instant, and that story was probably that they're a bad person. But now that you know about the shortcuts your brain was taking, could you maybe write a different story? A story about their situation, not just their character. That's the challenge, and it's the first step to a wiser mind.